And if you listen closely, there's a nice tactile feel and sound to these cuts. So if you're into that ASMR kind of, this is right up your alley. Last week I posted this clip of me filming a band while also simultaneously switching between the camera angles during a recent live stream that I was doing. Sometimes it's just not possible for me to have someone there with me switching between the camera angles, and other times I just want full creative control over the live stream. While my phone worked fine, if you look at the video, I had to take my hand off the grip of the gimbal in order to press the buttons on the screen. That worked fine, but in my post, I said my life would be so much easier if I had a grip that I could hold that had the buttons integrated into it. After a week-long hackathon, I give you the hate5grip. The hate5grip is a DIY wireless camera angle switcher. In this video, I'll go over how it works at a very high level. If you want a full, complete step-by-step breakdown on how I built it, I'll be doing a live stream Q&A on my Patreon feed in the coming days, so sign up if you want to tune into that. I'll also be putting the code and the 3D printable files on my GitHub repo in the near future. The hate5grip runs on a Raspberry Pi Zero, which is a microprocessor I picked up for about 10 bucks. It has a 1 GHz single-core CPU with 512 megabytes of RAM, micro USB ports, it supports 802.11b GNN Wi-Fi, and has Bluetooth Low Energy. The RPi has a number of GPIO, or general purpose input-output pins, that allow you to connect buttons and sensors which you can then write code around. In order to make the hate5grip work, I needed a way to send the button presses wirelessly to a computer running OBS, which is what broadcasts the stream out to the world. There are a bunch of ways of doing it, but what I did was I wrote a Python script on the RPi using the Python module GPIO0, which let me define listening actions on each button. I also configured the RPi to automatically connect to the same Wi-Fi network as the computer running OBS. The downside is that this requires having a Wi-Fi network, whereas going like a Bluetooth approach would allow the remote to connect to the computer directly. But there are some limitations with Bluetooth, and I figured, given my experience with building web servers, it was easier for me to just build the solution using a web-based approach. On the streaming computer, I wrote a Python server using Flask to listen for HTTP requests sent from the remote and then simulating the pressing of a key on the keyboard. I have those same keys mapped as shortcuts in OBS to allow for the quick switching of angles. In other words, the hate5grip is sending HTTP web requests over Wi-Fi to a web server running on the same computer's OBS, and whenever a button is pressed, the web server recognizes the button that was pressed and it simulates the pressing of that same button on the keyboard, and that same button is mapped in OBS to the corresponding angle to switch to. You can think of this whole thing as a custom wireless macro keyboard where each of these buttons is defined to a specific action. In order to house this thing, I found a 3D printable design for just a generic grip, and I modified it heavily to be able to house both the RPi and a custom mount for the buttons. The other thing that I did is I 3D printed a button mount that places the buttons at an offset so that when my fingers reach around, the index button is closer to the index finger, the middle and ring fingers are further out, and the pinky button is closer to my pinky. In order to power the hate5grip, I hacked together a cable that pulls 5 volts from the DJI Ronin focus wheel and sends it to the hate5grip via micro USB. Down the road, I'll probably add a rechargeable LiPo battery to the hate5grip. That way I don't have to worry about any cables, and then I could also technically use the grip separate from the DJI Ronin. You might be wondering, this is great and all, but what's the point in switching between camera angles if you can't even see what the other camera angles are showing? The way that I do that is by running a Hollyland Mars X, which is an HDMI wireless transmitter, from the streaming computer and sending the multi-view, which is showing all the camera angles, wirelessly to my phone and keeping that mounted on my gimbal. That way, while I'm running the gimbal and switching between angles, I can look at my phone, which is showing a screen share of what's on OBS. It'll be as if I'm sitting in front of the computer looking at all the available angles and cutting between them. All right, so here's a quick demo showing you how it all works. So right now I have the Hollyland app on my phone, which is able to see what's on the computer screen. And so if I cut to this close-up angle here, you'll be able to see all the camera angles. So we have camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, and camera 4. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mount this on my gimbal, and when I'm operating the gimbal, I'll be able to look at the screen and see what's available to cut to, and I'll be able to use the grip to actually make the cuts. So let's just go ahead and do it. As you can see, my right hand is still on the Ronin to give it some stability, and I'm using my left hand as both stability and also to be able to press these buttons to make the cuts. So let's just do a quick demo. And if you listen closely, there's a nice tactile feel and sound to these cuts. So if you're into that ASMR kind of, this is right up your alley. It's pretty seamless. Again, I'm able to look at the screen here, and while I'm filming, I'm able to just make the cuts as I need to. The latency is negligible, so there's obviously going to be some latency between the camera and what's coming in OBS. It's maybe only a couple milliseconds, and there's going to be latency from streaming the screen over wirelessly to my phone. And what I've noticed is that latency from the HDMI transmitter is probably even less than the latency coming from the cameras into OBS. So all in all, it's negligible, and I think this is going to work really well for my purposes, and pretty happy with it. So again, I'm able to just really move around and make the cuts, and I don't have to take my hand off, which is great. So again, what's cool is my hand is still giving the support here, and I'm able to just look and cut. And that's more or less it. There's still a lot more work that can be done, but I'm pretty stoked on how version 1 came out after just 1 week of hacking on it. If you want a complete step-by-step instructional guide showing you the RPi installation, the electrical wiring, the 3D printing, and a complete tutorial on how the code works, I'll be doing a live stream explanation on my Patreon feed in the coming days, as well as a Q&A. If you missed the live stream, I'll keep the video up on Patreon so you can watch it whenever you want, and you can shoot me questions via DM. Anyway, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next build.